Thank you all for joining us. My name is Mel Bilko. I am Kila's head of community. We also have the lovely Ines Alverne helping us out today, so you might see her in the chat answering all of your technical questions, so feel free to say hi to her. I just wanted to start the session today by acknowledging that here in Vancouver, we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and give thanks for their generosity and hospitality on these lands and waters. I'm very excited to be able to facilitate 10 sessions and 5 lunch and learns over the next 5 days for you all. And this wouldn't be possible without the help of all of our amazing speakers who have volunteered their time, as well as to our sponsors, Imagine Canada, Pano, and the Good Partnership. So thank you all. And just a reminder that all the sessions will be recorded, and you will receive the recording along with the slide deck by the end of this week and at the end of the conference. All right, now with that all out of the way, I'd love to introduce our next speaker for this Lunch and Learn session, Ryan Woroniecki. Ryan is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at DonorSearch, a prospect research, screening, and analytics company that focuses on proven philanthropy. He's worked with hundreds of nonprofits and is a member of APRA-MD. And when he isn't working, he is an avid kickball player. Ryan's session today will be focused on teaching you how to set up a successful major gifts program. And these lunch and learns are meant to be just a little bit more interactive than our normal sessions. So please feel free to pop any of your questions into the Q&A and chat box, and we'll try to get to them sporadically kind of throughout the presentation. And you can do this by typing in your questions in the Q&A and chat box. And I know that you're all familiar with Zoom, but just a reminder that if you want everyone to see your question or concern, please make sure you select all attendees and panelists. And that is pretty much it. I will pass it off to you now, Ryan. We're super excited to have you here, and I'll let you start sharing your screen now.
Thanks so much, Mel. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today with everybody else that's joining us from all over, I guess, North America. And you said there's some people from Australia as well, typically?
Typically, but you know what? It might be a little bit early for them. So I haven't seen anyone from Australia here right now. So yeah.
I don't understand. Why don't they want to wake up for this? No, I completely get that. We had a meeting. So I'm out just north of DC in a town called Silver Spring, Maryland. And the company is mostly located here on the East Coast of the US, but there's a few people out on the West Coast. And we had an 8:30 meeting, and 3 of our West Coasters made it at 5:30 a.m. And I don't know why. So I get it. Early mornings, the time is not for work.
Not at all, unless you have like 2 cups of coffee like me.
Down and go. So, major gift operations, planning for success. What we're going to cover today is basically at a high level what you should be thinking about when it comes to major gifts operations. What are major gifts? How should you think about them? How should you plan for them? We'll get into all that fun stuff. First, Mel already gave a great intro about me, so I don't need to talk about myself. I'll briefly talk about DonorSearch, the company where I work. So we're a prospect research and wealth screening company. For those of you that don't know what it means, we basically look at donors on behalf of organizations and tell them the upside and tell them information about how they might be able to successfully market to whom. And we'll get into some more details about that as we go through the session, just purely educationally. We're headquartered between Baltimore and DC, a town called Marriottsville, Maryland. There's about 60 of us. We work with right around 6,000 nonprofits. And again, the thing that we really try and do is just identify how much and where else people's donors give. So the agenda, we're going to start with why individual giving matters. And basically, if you think about the grand scheme of fundraising, what does individual giving look like as opposed to corporate giving or foundation giving, that kind of a thing. Then we're going to go through quantifying opportunities. There's a fun, really interactive session. So I hope that you've all had your coffee and we can go back and forth at that point. And then we'll talk about managing your portfolio a bit, which is really important. And then there's questions at the end. Of course, if you have questions as we're going through this, please, please, please jump in, drop it in the chat. Mel kindly offered to monitor that, and she'll hop in.
I did? Just kidding.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I will absolutely do that.
Oh, thanks, Mel. So why individual giving matters. So this is a look at giving in the United States. So if you are in Canada, it's not completely irrelevant, but these numbers don't speak to giving in your country. For those of you that are familiar, every year, the Giving USA report is kicked out. It's the longest latitudinal study of giving. It looks at giving in the United States going all the way back to 1979. And it's great because it allows us to say things like, well, this is what we learned based on giving in the last recession, which actually was, it took about a year for giving to drop, even after the economy had tanked. But we're not going to focus on that now. What we're going to focus on is, how did America give, and how does America give? The US gives specifically. I'm not trying to offend Canadians by acting like the United States is just America. I know we make that mistake from time to time. But the thought is, if you're looking at this graph, last year, United States citizens or residents donated just shy of $450 billion, which is great. It's the largest amount of money ever donated, which is a good thing because a giving trend that benefits the nonprofit sector is one where individuals, corporations, foundations give more. One of the other good things that I will mention, if we think about the fact that for a while, it looked like the economy was really tanking when COVID crept along. If you think about it, anytime you're running up to a really big challenge or a problem, you want to have momentum. Just like if you're going to ride your bike up a hill, you'd rather have momentum going for you. And that is what had started to happen with us when COVID hit. And, you know, for many organizations, there were a number of changes, but giving dropped for a bit. If not for the momentum, it could have been even worse. But, you know, that said, I want to talk about why individual giving matters. So if we look at the nearly $450 billion donated in the US last year, you'll see that over here on the left, 17% of that came from foundations, so that's a sizable chunk. About 10% of that, came from bequests. So really individuals, just individuals that had decided to leave an organization or multiple organizations in their will. 5% corporations at 21 million, and 69% of that money came from living individuals, not through a different vehicle. So if we think about that, that means most of the money donated is coming through individuals. That's the biggest potential source of revenue. So if we think about ourselves as organizations, I'm going to ask everyone to drop stuff in the chat, and Mel, I'll ask you to help because I can't look at it since I'm looking at my screen. But for you as orgs who are attending, does most of your money come from individuals? Do most of your fundraising efforts focus on individuals? Or is most of what you're doing focusing on grants or corporate giving?
We got a couple of yeses coming in here.
Well, that's good.
Grants. Most in individuals, mostly grants. A lot of people are saying individuals, actually.
That's awesome. That's really good to hear. And I think that's probably a change I've noticed among nonprofits over the past 5 to 10 years. I've been in the sector for about 10 years, and it seems as though more orgs understand this and are moving towards individual giving. If you're not one of those orgs that focuses on individual giving, obviously this graph is somewhat telling, but there's a different way to think about this. If you think about really mature, sophisticated fundraising organizations, such as higher ed and healthcare, they've got a lot of people in the fundraising office, and most of that people are dedicated to individual giving, even if it's the annual fund and, you know, in the case of healthcare, trying to convert patients into donors as opposed to corporate and foundation giving. If you do a head count at the bigger orgs, again, more people are focused on individuals for that reason, because there's more funding opportunities. Along those lines, we've got this really, really old principle called the Pareto Principle. Many of you are probably familiar. There's this fella named Vilfredo Pareto in Italy, and what he noticed was about 80% of the peas in his garden came from 20% of the plants. And when he looked around, and one of the things that he looked around at was actually land ownership in Italy, what he figured out was that 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. And thus was born the Pareto Principle, the 80-20 rule, where, again, 20% of the effort is typically going to result in 80% of what comes back. And if you think about it, in the fundraising world, there's truth from a major gift perspective. There's also truth in terms of the number of gifts that you get from your donors. So are any of you familiar with the FEP, or the Fundraising Effectiveness Project?
Katie is saying yes. Doug is saying no. We got a few yeses and a few no's coming in here.
Okay.
No, but I am interested.
Okay, awesome.
Tell us more.
Good. So Mel, I don't know, but do you share the presentation afterwards? If so, there's a live link.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
We do.
Yep. So that is a live link. You can go to the blog post and learn more. But FEP, or Fundraising Effectiveness Project, there's a number of fundraising platforms that anonymize donor data and all share it. The Fundraising Effectiveness Project it's a combination of AFP International and the Urban Institute partnering to better understand how people give. So imagine that you make a gift to a nonprofit. That gift might be shared with the date of the gift, the amount of the gift, and your donor ID, so that they can see if you gave a second time, maybe that was your third gift, is your gift size increasing, that type of a thing. So they have tons of data, and they're able to figure things out, such as the donor retention rate for first-time donors is about under 20%, which is somewhat terrifying if you think about, hey, how do we generate revenue year over year from our donors if the new ones don't give again? But specifically for these purposes, if we think about it relative to the Pareto Principle, 88% of gifts came from 12% of the donors. And if you look even smaller, 76% of the gifts came from 3% of the donors. So one of the things that you should be doing is, number one, not focusing on it just, not just individuals, but focusing on individuals and prioritizing them over some of the other revenue streams with your intentional efforts. But also, you should make sure you know who your better donors are so that you focus on them, and who the better opportunities are so you focus on them. Because if we follow these numbers, it really only takes you paying close attention and showing a lot of donor love to a small subset of your database and your donors. There's another important piece here. So what I've done is I've taken a screenshot of a thank you email that I got from a gift that I made. So go back to FEP and think that 20% roughly of first-time donors give a second gift. Why might that be? Well, one of the reasons is that donors don't always receive the stewardship that they might expect to, or that they should. And in this case, I hit a bunch of data, so you don't know where I live, and you don't know what organization this is, because I'm not trying to pick on anybody. But the only kind of a thank you that I got for making this gift was this email that said, subject, thank you for your order with. Now that's because that donor platform, the donor database, the online giving platform, it was tied to a ticketing system or an order purchase processing system. And so as a result, their automated email doesn't say just thanks for your gift, it says thanks for your order. So this, the automated receipt, which is good, right? Donors like that, oftentimes for tax purposes. It does not equal a thank you letter. So it's important to be intentional and focused and grateful, and to show that automated emails work. They work very well, but you want to send something other than just the receipt. So out of curiosity of those here, how many of you have intentional stewardship plans where everyone who makes a gift gets a thank you email or letter or phone call independent of a gift receipt?
We have some yeses. Yes, absolutely. Oh, definitely. Lots of people are saying yes.
Oh, that's great.
An
That
overwhelming response of yes. Yeah.
good for you. Good for all of you. As basic as that is, there are so many orgs that don't do it. And I also see that Vicky raised her hand. So bravo, Vicky. So this is the most interactive part of the session, the most intentionally interactive part of the session. So we're all busy. We all only have so much time in the day. In an ideal world, we would pick up the phone and call all of our donors to thank them. But we don't really have that kind of time. So here's a fun little exercise where we're going to look at, in this case, it's a bunch of members of the, this is not good, I'm spacing, of the Golden State Warriors from their championship year last year. And the thought is, if these were our donors and we know nothing else other than their giving information with us because we're tracking that data in our database, who do we call? So as an example, if we look at Draymond Green, almost in the middle there. So Draymond recently gave us $15. He was one of the donors that gave to us this week that we're looking at. His lifetime giving is $45. And he's given 2 gifts over his lifetime as a donor. Whereas Glenn Robinson gave $16 most recently, $45 over his lifetime, and 3 total gifts. So who do we call? You only have time for one.
We have people saying Omari. Omari seems like.
Who? Omari's a good one.
People are saying Omari D'Angelo.
Okay. Okay.
I'm waiting for people to comment. Okay, you know what? 1, 2, 3. People are saying Jacob now.
People are saying
you know
Jacob.
What? There is quite a vast set of responses here.
Well, and that's good, because depending on the way you look at this, there's a number of people that you would want to call. So the first one was Omari. Omari's last gift was $1,000, lifetime giving $2,500. So that makes perfect sense, right? Thank the person that's a big donor. Conversely, I think the second one you said, Mel, was D'Angelo. Well, D'Angelo is a first-time donor of $250. So depending on the size of our organization, he could be a sizable donor. And certainly he might be a prospect if that's his first-time gift. And Jacob Evans, yeah, absolutely. Jacob's given 10 gifts. He is loyal. Statistically, he might even be a good planned giving opportunity at this point. So yeah, there's a bunch of right answers.
Katie also mentions that we all know that we would just work extra and call them all. We are fundraisers. We are overachievers. She has that right.
Good for you. Power to you. So here's the next part. We're going to layer in more information. So now the thought is, guess what? We've learned more about these people. Does that change who we should call? So in the US and Canada, it's a little different, but people's real estate ownership information is pretty available. In the US, that data is readily available. You can find it on the internet in most places. In Canada, oftentimes you have to go to the physical tax assessment office for that, the province, or I guess the underlying region within the province. But the thought is, now we know that Alec Burks has $3.1 million in real estate, and we can't find any real estate for Omari Spellman. So unless you're the one person who is going to call everyone, and again, hats off to you, who do we call?
D'Angelo is what Doug is saying. Kara as well is saying D'Angelo. Same with Stephanie. Lots of people are saying either D'Angelo or Jacob.
Yep. And so the thought now is, hey, our first time donor who gave us $250 has a lot of assets. It would appear, right? They're very, very wealthy. Just because they own real estate doesn't mean that they have a lot of liquidity, but you would imagine there's a fair amount of money there to buy a $5 million house. And yet again, in the case of Jacob, that's a lot of real estate and very loyal. So yes, both good answers. There's other good answers there as well, but we're going to move this along. So now we've found out more information. So now we're looking to see, well, wait a minute. It appears that Jacob sits on the board of a grant giving foundation, as does this fella, Steph Curry, down here. And if you look to the right, we're saying this is the size of the single largest gift they've given elsewhere. So in the case of Omari Spellman, we can't find Omari making any gifts anywhere else. In the case of Glenn Robinson, the single largest gift that we found him making elsewhere is $100. So my question is, does this change who you call now that we know about the philanthropic side of these individuals? Or does it pretty much stay the same? And if it does change, who are we reaching out to?
Anne is saying, I still say Steph Curry. Sierra is saying, I don't know anymore. Kelly says, I'm still looking with Jacob. Leyland says, depends on the particular cause that is being donated to. Good point.
Ooh.
Andrew says, Omari loves our org.
Well, congratulations. Right, that's true.
Marinella says, I'll go with the cause and on our common missions.
Got it. So does the giving elsewhere align with this organizational mission, which is certainly something that comes up and makes it would appear that the donor has a higher likelihood of making a gift. I mean, we should all be so lucky that these are the 7, 8 donors that we had last week that have this kind of significant upside. And yes, by all means, Jacob is a wonderful person to focus on, but there's many. The thought was, if we're looking at this, and let's say that we look at D'Angelo Russell. D'Angelo is very, very wealthy, but comparatively, is he the one that we should focus on? Probably not. Again, not a wrong answer, but Steph Curry's given to us a few times, sits on the board of a grant giving foundation, made a $500,000 gift somewhere else. I would argue that at that magnitude, even if Steph doesn't like us as much, the amount of money that he would be likely to give us would be larger than somebody without that philanthropic track record, regardless of the kind of organization that they've given to.
Ryan, do you mind if I interrupt you for a second here? Brenda said she joined late. How do you find out their largest gift elsewhere? Can you go back to that last slide and just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. So largest gift elsewhere. So that's one of the things that we do at DonorSearch. We aggregate charitable giving data. So think back in the days before COVID, when you might go see a play or a performance. In the back of the program, there's the donor honor roll, where they list different donor names, giving it different levels or circles. And when organizations come to us, we basically are in a position to say, hey, this is the size of the single largest gift they've given elsewhere. There are other vendors that do the same kind of thing, for sure. But let's say that you don't have the luxury of purchasing a research tool like ours. There are some not that difficult ways. So one of the ways that you could go about doing that is you could Google search charitable gifts and a person's name, or donor honor roll and a person's name. And by doing that, you'll probably be able to surface anything that's out there on the web. Another way that you could go about doing that, hypothetically, would be, let's say it's somebody like a Jacob Evans, where they've given 10 gifts, and so there's obviously a relationship. Or maybe somebody like D'Angelo Russell, where it's a first-time gift of size or of note worth. That's the kind of thing where you might want to ask your board. You might want to say, hey, we got a new donor, or there's a donor that has been giving to us for a while, and we're thinking about making outreach. Do you know anything about this person? Do you know if they've made large gifts elsewhere? If so, how big? And do you know to where? So that's how you might go about doing that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So quantifying opportunities, predictors. So one of the things that we've done here at DonorSearch is we've actually done some regression analysis. So on a regular basis, we review nonprofits' files to figure out which of these donors have significant upside, which data sets can we append, such as charitable giving or their real estate. And we typically also get those organizations' previous giving from those individuals. Now, we don't use that for anything other than some modeling and ratings, but we have anonymized the data and we've back tested it. So not that long ago, we looked at data from 400 different nonprofits, 400 of our clients for whom we screened records, right? And those 400 organizations, collectively, they gave us 2 million individuals. And those 2 million individuals gave those orgs $5 billion. So we were looking to see, okay, what data is it that we can append that points to the smallest percentage of individuals, the smallest percentage of the 2 million people who've given away the largest percent of the $5 billion, kind of going back to that Pareto Principle, right? And so what we've done is we figured out these are the 5 most predictive markers. So number 1, giving to your organization, internal giving, RFM. So RFM is simply recency, frequency, and money. If we go back to this sheet right here, this is almost RFM. It's total gift amount, that's money, number of gifts, that's frequency, and R, or recency, that would be the date. And all you do is everyone gets a percentile score. And so if you gave yesterday, you'd have a recency of 100. If there's someone in the database that's never given, they'd have a 0. You do the same for all 3, you add them up, and then you get a 0 to 300 score, where 300 is your best donor, and 0 is somebody with whom you don't really have a relationship with. And so if you're trying to figure out, hey, who do we prioritize other than the people that donated last week? That's a really easy way to do that. So out of the people here, how many of you have done something like that?
Got a few no's coming in. Kara's saying, I will now. Monica said on a small scale, but yeah, the vast majority of people are definitely saying no. No, but I should.
Okay. Yeah, there are some really easy Excel tricks that you can use to do that. And it's just a great way. Oftentimes people visualize it and break it out into quarters. So you run your RFM on the entire file and you say, okay, I want to know everybody who is 300 down to 225 because that's the top quartile, right? That's the top 25% of folks that are most engaged when it comes to giving. If that's something you're interested in learning a little more about, I actually have some Excel formulas and I can just share them with you. So don't hesitate to email afterwards. But short of that, we go into looking at other data. The next best predictor that we were able to
Ryan,
find
sorry,
is,
can I interrupt you 1 second? Can you just go over what RFM is again, just for those that missed that?
oh yes, absolutely. RFM stands for recency, frequency, and money. And actually, if you really want to get dirty with data, so to speak, there's a wonderful book called Fundraising Analytics by a guy named Josh Burkholz, and he has an entire chapter dedicated to that. But it came from the for-profit world. Companies do that with you as a consumer. You know, if you think about going to the grocery store, so the grocery store by me is Harris Teeter. That's the one that I shop at. I have no idea if it exists near you. It could be Kroger's, Aldi, Food Lion, Giant, Wegmans, if you're up in the Buffalo area. But the thought is they break down and they figure out, hey, who are our best clients? And I mean, they get more granular. What do they buy with us? And then they give you ads related to those things that you like to buy. But they show you extra love and show you extra attention if you are one of the best clients according to the RFM. And it's no different than what we as nonprofit professionals should be doing.
What was that name of that book again?
Fundraising Analytics.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The second best one, so obviously the best one is, hey, take your own data, right? Because again, you're more likely to get a gift from somebody that's given before than from a total stranger. The next best one is people that give elsewhere. So if you're trying to find somebody that's likely to be a major gift opportunity, and let's say there's 10 people with the same exact RFM, that's even. If you can find that they've given a gift of 5,000 or more to another organization, even if it's a very different kind of organization, statistically, they're the right people to focus on. That likelihood goes up even more dramatically as the size of the gift goes up. So I think in our study, we found something like less than 1% of the people are responsible for something like 50% of the dollars donated. And we figured that out by flagging the folks that have given six-figure gifts elsewhere, right? So it's not a huge surprise in that the people that make large gifts keep giving large gifts. And where that starts to become predictive, at least in the United States, is $5,000. As you keep going down, I won't spend too much more time here because I want to keep this moving. But people that sit on the board of grant-giving foundations, people that make a lot of political gifts. In fact, we figured out that 99.9% of the entire US doesn't make a one-time $1,000 FEC gift or political gift. So if you find somebody that does, we're talking about 0.1%. The same as my assumption is something very similar is true in Canada. There's a caveat in the United States. A number of organizations are choosing not to use political giving data because the FEC put out a ruling that said it shouldn't be used for fundraising purposes. So while it's very predictive, just be careful and make sure you talk to your board or your lawyer and you have a good idea of what you want to do. And then the last one is real estate. Real estate is predictive at $2 million or more US, but below that, it's not terribly predictive. And the other thing to consider is that it's really, really relative. So I'm right out of DC. If we go a few miles in one direction, the house that I live in a townhouse, it's nothing special. That could easily go for 7 times the price just because of where the land is. And that's no different than, say, San Francisco. But if I just go about an hour north in Pennsylvania, this same property could be worth half of what it's worth. So that the whole concept of saying, hey, this person's a good opportunity because of real estate, it's very relative to where you are. So now that we know some of the things to look for, and again, in all honesty, you can figure all of this stuff out without a vendor like a DonorSearch, just by, in many cases, searching on the internet. The next thing is you need to make sure you're managing your portfolio. So I did steal Mel a tequila screenshot.
Thank
I
you.
know it's not supposed to be about you, but the most important thing you can do is to track your donor data and then make sure that you have a process and use that process so that as a gift comes in, the gift is entered into the system so that you always know that Mel Bilko made a $20 gift on this date. Because if you don't, that's the easiest way to lose the relationship. So make sure you're tracking everything. And speaking of tracking everything and having those processes, I'm going to talk about another report here. So I want to basically get a sense of where you all stand relative to this. So we did a report with MarketSmart. MarketSmart is kind of like a lead qualification service for nonprofits. And we also worked with AFPDC and we worked with APC. It's an association of fundraising consultants. And in total, we surveyed about 600 different organizations. And there were different numbers of orgs that responded to different questions. And so this question in particular, we asked if organizations had major gift goals as part of their strategic plan. And in this case, there were about 460 orgs that responded. And so if you look across the bottom here, we're highlighting who falls into what categories. So there were 387 that said, yes, we have major gifts in the strategic plan. There were 32 that said there's no major gift goals in the plan. 16 were unsure, and then 28 of them said, hey, we don't even have a plan. And what's interesting here, and not too terribly surprising, is that if you look at the ones that had major gifts in the plan compared to the others, I wouldn't say overwhelmingly met their goal, but most of them, 81%, either met their goal or got close. Whereas you look at the others, when major gifts aren't in the plan, they're less likely to meet the major gift goals. And again, the plan is the organization's strategic plan. So for those of you listening and watching, how many of you have major gifts as part of your strategic plan? Seeing some answers. I don't know where they are, but the bar popped up.
We have a few people saying yes, a couple of people saying not yet, but the vast majority, I'd say, have a yes in their response.
Good for you. Good for you. That is the first step in being able to be successful with the smaller subset of folks. So let me ask this. From your perspective, folks, what's the definition of a major gift? So I know some of the orgs that I have worked with historically, it's varied. Kind of like this chart shows, actually. Some orgs that are just getting started with individual giving programs, it might be $1,000. I think the most common one I've experienced in my time, and again, you have to think oftentimes these are people that reached out to a prospect research company, $5,000 has been the threshold, but there are very large organizations where if you don't give $100,000 or $1 million, it's not a major gift. So what about you all? Where do we shake out here?
Looks to me more on the lower end. So some people are saying greater than 1,000. We got some that's saying 2,500 plus, 5,000 plus. Oh, Alicia says 50,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so it varies. We have Shannon saying 500 plus. So yeah, very much varies here.
Good. And I want to congratulate whoever said 500 plus, because many orgs that don't have a history of doing major gifts, They don't even want to set a threshold because that could discourage people that give it lower amounts. Or they could say, well, we want to set a threshold of a higher number, but worse, nobody's given it that size. So they create this kind of inflated major gift where there's no culture of giving at that level. And that's really dangerous. So kudos to you. And again, kind of going back to the survey, this gives you a sense of how these 680 organizations shook out, where, yeah, most of them, if you look at it, it's a little over 60% were $5,000 or less. So, from your perspective, if you wrote $1,000, you shouldn't feel bad. It's actually the most frequent response in this survey. But the important part, again, is making sure, hey, it's defined, which it sounds like all of you are on top of, which is fantastic. The next one, as we think about major gifts, this is somewhat, maybe not for you all, since you're already ahead of this. Oftentimes, the purpose of this is to say, hey, when you're talking to your board about major gifts, these are some of the things that they should be aware of, which is it takes time. It takes a while to close a major gift. So when you think of time from prospect identification, which could be as simple as saying, oh, Draymond Green is the one that we're interested in when we look at those that gave last week, all the way to the gift closing, which means the agreement is signed. If you see here, we've got some that take a few weeks. Those are outliers. Some less than 6 months, more than 6 months to less than 12. That's the yellow. And then 1 to 2 years. That's the dark green. Now, keep in mind that the timeline is probably going to grow based on the size of the gift. So when Michael Bloomberg gave $1 billion to Johns Hopkins, that's a multi-year process. Whereas for the organization that has a $500 major gift threshold, some of those might just take a few weeks, and that would make sense. So the important part, though, is for most orgs, we're talking about a year to complete the major gift cycle. So it's pretty important to be prepared as you're spinning it up or as you're putting more effort into it, just to understand that it should take a while. How many of you benchmark that process? Do any of you track how long it takes to close a major gift? And if so, how long is it?
We got many people saying no. Vicky
No.
says around a year. Monica says normally 6 months to a year, but a lot of people are saying no. Sylvie says up to 18 months.
Okay. Well, for those of you that don't track it, I would highly recommend it. And for those of you that do, good for you. Good for you. You're ahead of the game, as you can tell. I'm going to speed through this because I know we have to end pretty soon. But here's one of the most important parts. There's a lot of data and numbers here, but if you look, organization raised under 3 million on the left, organization raised 3 million or more. If you see this, goal status, met or got close, didn't meet. What this is saying is if you raise 3 million or less in a year, you should have 50 or less prospects under management. So, if you think about it, if you have a really, really big to-do list and you try to do all of it, you're never going to catch up. You're going to be like me on the weekend where you just end up on the couch and nothing ends up done. Whereas if it's manageable, if there's only 50 people that you're going to focus on throughout the course of the year, you're much more likely to have success. So you should be intentional about the size of your portfolio. Here's a recap. And Mel, for time, I need to end right about now, don't I?
I wasn't going to be rude, but yeah.
Okay.
So I don't think we'll have time for Q&As, but so I'm just recording them all right now, and we'll try to answer them in the follow-up email if that's cool.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me just say this last thing, and then I'll go to the Q&A screen, and we can say goodbye. You should make sure that you have a way of tracking the different stages of the major gift process, so you can move people through the steps. These are some stages that I worked on with an organization called NVTRP. and I probably shouldn't have their name in here, so I apologize to you, Wendy, if you're looking. But basically, they figured, hey, here's 5 simple steps. They were able to put it in their CRM. So as they said, hey, we've identified this person, to, hey, we talked to them and they are actually interested, to, okay, now we're working to build the relationship. You know, we're giving them tours of the facilities, and all the way up to, hey, we asked. You need to be able to track this so you have the appropriate communication and you're able to have the appropriate cadence. This is one of the most important parts. So, you know, key takeaways, look, I'm telling you to focus on individuals. Again, I'm kind of biased. That's the world that I come from, but that's where most of the money is. If possible, thank and qualify new donors immediately. And remember, thanking them is not just a tax receipt. Major gifts take time, so plan accordingly. Don't spread your efforts too thin. Just focus on the right number of people that you can maintain relationships with, given the rest of your responsibility. And make sure you're using a moves management process. Thanks, everybody. I'm so sorry that I went over, but I'm so grateful that I could spend the lunch hour with you out on the West Coast.
Oh my gosh, don't be sorry. That was great. We had tons of engagement. I know everyone was really, really, you know, interested in this topic. So you know what? Maybe Ryan will have to have you back again. Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. Like I said, we will record all these questions and try to answer them all in the follow-up email. And please feel free to reach out to Ryan yourself as well. I know that he is super happy to chat with you all. So just before we sign off here, I just wanted to let you guys know that once this webinar closes, there will be a short Q&A or survey that pops up. We would love any of your feedback. It really helps us improve these webinars, so really appreciate it. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind you all that our next session is literally in about 10 minutes. So I'm really looking forward to it. It is our keynote speaker, Yolanda Johnson, joining us. And she is the founder of Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy. And she's talking all about how to build donor diversity. So it's going to be a really engaging session, I believe. I can't see right now, but I'm hoping Ines popped the registration link into the chat in case you haven't registered for that one already. And that is it for me. I'm so sorry that we're kind of not able to do any of the Q&A, but feel free to reach out to Ryan. Ryan, it was such a pleasure to have you. I don't know if you had any kind of last remarks before we close it off here.
No, thanks so much for having me, Mel and Ines, and thanks everybody for coming and staying, and hopefully we can chat sometime in the future about fundraising operations.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.